Record.
And works good.
Recording.
Ready, Emily?
What's up?
You ready?
Yes.
Do you have the presentation from Josh?
Yep, it is pulled up on that computer, so we'll just call meeting order and we get started.
The September 9th meeting of the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission will now come to order at 5:37 p.m. Can you please have a roll call of members, Pamela?
Yes, Chair Stephanie Dahl is absent. Co-Chair Tori Leviton.
Here.
Commissioner Kate Murphy is absent. Commissioner Fred Wolf.
Here.
Commissioner Rob Eber.
Yes.
Commissioner Aaron Gradinsky. Absent. And Commissioner Chelsea Scott.
Here.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are going to forego the audience participation in.
There's no one signed up. So just as a reminder to the commission, if you could use your microphones when you speak so that the recording will pick it up.
Understood. The only item on the consent agenda is the minutes from the August meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the August 12th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor to approve the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Ptrc's, we're gonna look at this. Out of respect to our guest presenter, we are gonna do our unfinished business afterward. We are gonna take the items under new business first. Ms. Harriet Lemaire, Executive Director for the Highline Canal Conservancy, has a presentation for us. This is only informational. Thank you.
Thanks,
Sure.
Commissioner Littleton. Littleton?
Love it.
Okay, so, sorry. I'm gonna start because I can't help but do this. We're doing a walk for the canal and a bike ride for the canal, and it's a fundraiser in lieu of an event, like a dining or the big events that people are having. But the bike jersey, I just wanted you guys to see it. It's so cool, and you get this if you sign up. So that's my little, you'll see Jim Lockhead with Denver Water and the management team at Denver Water wore these and rode the whole canal together. So we'd love it if you guys want to encourage people to do that. We have way less participation than last year. I think it's because people felt worried about nonprofits last year. But anyway, we're doing fine, but we'd love any promotion of that. So we are working really hard at the Conservancy to populate this understanding of stormwater. So that's why we're here. I feel like we have presented to your group before. Didn't Josh maybe present?
Yes, it was in October 2020.
Okay, so it's been a while. So you'll get some updates and be able to see some of the actual structures. And one of the reasons I think it's so important is because you guys are going to do a master plan for the village. And I know that there's some questions in the draft questionnaire. This is Josh Phillips, our Director of Planning and Implementation, who's here in case some of the commissioners, and I know a few, are going to ask really technical questions that Harriet won't be able to answer. So he can maneuver through the whole master plan if you want to. But anyway, I think it's quite important that we have more people in the community that fully, or at least very deeply from a conceptual understanding, have a conceptual understanding of this transformation of the canal from irrigation to stormwater. So we wanted to come back. We're also going to go before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then with that, I think that the questions that are put in whatever questionnaires that the master planning group ends up putting out to the community, they're going to have to be looked at really carefully because it's so complex. It's not like an easy thing to just ask someone. And you don't, if you say, do you want your taxes raised to put stormwater in the Highline Canal, you're going to get a no. If you ask, do you want the canal to have water? You're going to get a yes. So you have to just be careful, and the more people like yourselves that understand this and how it works, and are able to ask whatever questions you want, you know, and I think that's just really important. We have in our grant deliverable from the organization that's funding us for this work that we're developing champions. And so that's what we're in the business of trying to do tonight, so, yeah. So with that, do I just click this? Let's see,
Yeah, you can put it in presentation mode.
just
if you
like
want.
that?
Or you can, yeah, or you can just click slide to slide.
Terry and Josh, while you guys are doing that, can I give you a heads up and start thinking about the answer to this question? And that is, if we want to try and put more water coming down through Three Pond Park and the infrastructure there, and then eventually into the lake, that is sort of the Clearview Farms Lake, how does that translate into potential flooding of our acting chair Littleton's backyard and all of the water as it goes down into Kent? So you can just start thinking about that.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that, and that's some uncertainty, and, yeah. So, you know that our work is to came up with all the communities along the canal, that we came up with a plan to transform last century's infrastructure into this century's open space network. And that our mission as an organization, I think people should understand, is to preserve, protect, and enhance the 71-mile-long canal in partnership with the public. And the public input on the plan for the Highline Canal was critical to our feeling confident moving forward and advocating, and also the fact that all the local governments endorsed the plan. So this work for the stormwater was a key part of the plan for the Highline Canal. These are the two plans. You know, the first was a community vision plan with over 5,000 local residents commenting on it from all along the 71-mile stretch, and then that resulted in what we call a framework plan, or the plan for the Highline Canal, which is about 360 pages long. I know I brought that to you guys before, so we won't read the whole thing today, okay? This is a wonderful graphic that Josh popped on here for us, showing the drainages that cross the Highline Canal. Currently, those drainages either go under or over the canal with either flumes or siphons. And so you can see that there's a lot of water that could go into the canal. Some of it already does, not necessarily any of these major drainage ways, but there's an opportunity to capture water in the canal and then put it back into these waterways as they go onto the west side, right? This is an image that we like to present that shows the canal with stormwater in it. You see a little tiny berm there. We're going to show some actual images of what these structures would look like in the canal too, because they're now some at Eisenhower Park. So this is, the canal during the planning was divided into different character zones, and of course Cherry Hills is in the wooded village, we call it, and this shows what might happen in the years to come without any water in the Highline Canal, which is what we're looking at if we don't adopt stormwater. And this one is the cross-section of, you know, actually years after stormwater's been put in, and the way it can sustain the landscape and the trees. For the existing trees for longer, and new trees. There still needs to be some watering, and I think that Cherry Hills well understands that with their own tree planting program. This is an excerpt from this living, breathing model that is managed by urban drainage and primarily urban drainage to, Mile High Flood. I think that's what its new name is. I always do that, sorry. But they keep this model and change it as changes are made to the Highline Canal and make updates. And so you'll see in here on this, and I know Rob's seen it before, I think many of you have, that they're the stars, the yellow stars, are the 100-year existing canal spills, and there's a number of them in the village. And then the constructed overflows that are recommended are the green triangles, and then the red hexagon, I think it is, are the proposed water quality berms that you just saw a picture of in the previous images. So this is just an excerpt from the master plan. We'll talk a little more about the cost for this and so forth, but if you want to. But in general, the estimate from the plan, when it was first done, was about $800,000 for the improvements, the actual capital improvements that would be needed to build these structures in Cherry Hills Village. And then there are, I can't remember how much we're estimating per mile with the combined service contract, for operations and maintenance
Yeah,
in the other communities. How much?
8,000
Yeah.
plus the tree care though.
Around 8,000 per mile plus tree care. So those are the numbers that your community will be looking at, as you move forward, depending on the results of the study that I understand is going to move forward that we'll talk about in just a sec.
Carrie, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you just go back to that slide?
Yep.
Sorry, can you explain what a 100-year existing canal spill is?
So the stormwater modeling looks at different, the frequency of flooding over different periods of time. And so that's like an unusual spill. That would be a lot of water in the Highland Canal. So this model that was created is a very conservative model because of the value of the property adjacent to the Highline Canal. We really needed to take a very conservative model to look at how much water could go in. And I can add to that, Josh, has pointed out to me, we've had debates about this, and we just were talking to Alan Leak with Respect Engineering, who I think has helped the village on many of your designs. By the way, congratulations. We just heard that you guys are receiving some big awards for the building. Yeah, what is it?
Thank you. For the Civic Center, this whole campus basically, so for the City Hall and the park, we won the American Society of Landscape Architects President's Award of
That's
Excellence,
amazing.
which is their highest honor, and then we received from American Public Works Association Colorado Chapter, Project of the Year for the park. So, and Alan Leak helped
Which
us with this building and
Yeah.
its stormwater.
He was really happy, so we just were talking to him. And I said, so how much more water can go into the Highline Canal and Cherry Hills Village? How much more capacity is there? Because there's a lot of existing flow just from the adjacent properties, and we all know those areas where you see water pouring into the Highline Canal. And he said it really depends on this study that you guys have released an RFP to have this stormwater model looked at in more detail, and someone from your staff or Josh could get into the details of what the village will be looking at. But I think it's $25,000 to dive in deeper to this. And I think as they dive in, they'll, it's my understanding that it'll really depend on how much water you can get out, when and where, and then what capacity there is in different areas. It's a living, breathing model, so each change you make impacts the capacity that the canal has. So there's not really a clear answer to that right now.
Sure.
Also another question, wasn't there a policy that was preventing water from going into the canal from adjacent properties?
Right.
And what's the status of this?
So historically, Denver Water was under a legal, sort of requirement that adjacent property, that there couldn't be any formalized inflows into the canal. Isn't that correct, Josh? Is that the right language? Yeah. But obviously, surface flow has been going in for many years, and they have turned their head at different times to different, flows of water into the canal. Some of them may have been allowed for different periods of time or short periods of time, and so they received an agreement through I think it was the state engineer and also the health department, because some of the reasons for that was the commingling of irrigation water with stormwater a number of years ago that would allow this commingling to occur in the Highland Canal and allow them to capture the stormwater, provided it's only held in the canal for 72 hours. You remember that? So it's sort of like when the water drips off your home and you want to capture it, if you remember that law that passed. It allows you to hold it for 72 hours without taking water that isn't yours to take, because it needs to make its way to its natural rivers and streams, because that water is owned by water rights holders downstream, if that all makes sense to people. starts to get, and Rob, you're very knowledgeable, I hope I explained that accurately.
Perfect.
Yeah, so,
Can I just back up?
so they've changed that, so we now can capture it for 72 hours.
Just one back up,
Yeah.
just to return to this model. for
Yes.
us. So could I parallel this 100-year existing canal spill to like a 100-year floodplain? Like the possibility of this is basically equivalent to what a 100-year possible flood. Okay, so that's yes to that. So then these proposed WQ berms, are they kind of in that zone where the spill could occur? And the
Yeah.
berms are gonna potentially prevent it? I'm just trying to understand, like you said, so we can kind of be stewards for the community of this.
Well, the water quality berms are in the Highland Canal themselves, and they're designed, the purpose of them is to slow down the water flow to maximize the filtration, because the water's being cleaned while it's in the canal. And also, they can be used to manage the water to avoid flooding, is my understanding. But hop up, Josh, if you want.
Sure, no, it's a complex slide, so I appreciate the chance to explain it. I actually, last October, we pulled up the master plan and tinkered around in here. So the 100 years is important because, yes, the same as a floodplain, that's the stormwater engineer's model to the 100-year event. And so in that 100-year event, all of those stars are locations where the canal would be a risk of overtopping. And so those are alleviated really more by the overflows and the spillways. So the berms are really for the smaller storm events. They would help that water pond promote filtration, infiltration. But in the major storms where the diamonds are, the green, the constructed overflow is simply hardening the trail. So where you have the gravel trail right now, there might be 20 or 30 feet of concrete that allows the water to spill out of the canal and into a location where it's deemed safe for that spill to occur. So this one here is into the gulch there at the Kent property at Dahlia Hollow, or not Dahlia Hollow, Blackburn, thank you. And then at Dahlia Hollow, this one is another formalized spill of Quincy Gulch continuing on in the channel. And then the really interesting one is at Three Pond, which proposes the constructed overflow so the water spills out of the canal and over the trail, but paired with a spillway, which to Commissioner Eber's question earlier, the idea would be to formalize that spillway to take water through the two ponds in the park and then down to the Clearview Pond. And so that yellow line tracks that route, and so that would be formalizing that route. So in a 100-year event, the water would be able to spill through there. And so that's really the spill mitigation infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think that these stars and where everything is located, this is a model for the whole canal, and that's why it's so important that the village is looking at this in greater detail, because we all know that there may not be capacity at Three Pond unless other work is done in those ponds and down on private property possibly, because we have visited about this in greater detail. So the where the constructed overflows are and how they work and how much water gets to those areas, that can all be slightly reconstructed. So it's just an initial design.
Well, with changing weather patterns too, it's just nice to see kind of some consideration and potentially the ability to reuse the water for the trees that.
You got it.
I just
The champion.
appreciate it. This looks great. Thank you.
And I can speak to Commissioner Eber's question just briefly too, because it's related to this point that if an overflow by Blackburn Common were to clear more capacity in the canal to carry more water, that could help to alleviate the spill situation up by Three Pond and mean there would be less water in the canal by the time it reaches the Dahlia Hollow Bend and then Three Pond Park, potentially sending less water through Three Pond. So that's where I think the analysis that you all are pursuing as a village, I think is so critical to really understand, the local interplay there. Oh, it is a little finicky.
Well, and
between the different elements.
also there's been talk about the interrelationship between, because the water flows. Greenwood Village and Cherry Hills Village, so Greenwood is upstream from you. So if they are able to take more, which would be, an agreement that can be looked at, it may reduce this capacity issue in Cherry Hills. So, yeah. So-
Harriet, if everything that you and Josh have worked on is implemented, all these improvements, do you foresee a time when the Highline Canal will have water in it all the time?
No, not all the time. It'll be during major, storm events.
Okay,
Yeah.
So how many,
So
it depends on how much water is let out of McClellan Reservoir? Or-
no, this water that we're talking about right now will be the future water source for the Highland Canal. Over the next 5 or so years, the Denver Water will decommission most of the canal for water delivery. So their use of irrigation water from McClellan and from the South Platte will be very minimal. They want to reserve the right to do that in the Highland Canal as the years go on. They want to keep their water right. They'd like to be able to put water in, but with the preciousness of that water, it's unlikely that after most of the head gates are closed up, that the Highland Canal will see a lot of water. They have said they'd like to reserve that right, though, to use the canal to irrigate the trees when possible. But the master plan for the feasibility study for this stormwater transition said that the canal would be wet some 100 more days a year than it would be without the stormwater going in. And I think it's really important to understand that wet does not mean filled like it used to be, but wet is better than nothing. So we're trying to do more with less water, and you'll see some of the pictures that I think will make you really happy about what it means to manage stormwater in the canal, because it means that the canal's being managed more than it is right now.
Well, as part of that management plan, do you foresee the Parks and Recreation Departments, Cherry Hills, Denver, Greenwood Village, taking a more active role in actually maintaining the vegetation on both sides of the canal? I was with the group a few weeks ago.
Oh, good.
That helped clean out.
I was out of town.
And they worked so hard. There were about 12 of them. And I just thought, there is so much work to do just in Cherry Hills to prune the trees, drag it out of the channel, pile it up, get Jeff and his people to come the next day and haul it away. It's overwhelming.
Well, and it keeps happening. I think it's important to understand that because it has water in it that flows, that you guys do a cleanup, major storm, debris from other areas could flow in addition to additional debris from the trees around the canal. And then I think I said to you last time that I think that the paradigm around, everyone's thinking around the canal needs to be that it's a wildlife refuge and wildlife corridor, and that some of that debris, some of that sort of roughness of the canal is really important to those critters. That's why we see so many animals in the Highland Canal and using the Highland Canal. If it were all cleaned out and pedicured and filled with water, they use it when it's dry too. And I've heard that from different folks as they're looking at the canal. And Denver Water said one time when they saw a community clean up and the whole base was so clean, they go, it doesn't need to be that clean. So there's an in-between, but I think you'll see some of the images of some of that work going on, and it's gonna have a functional purpose, which is to manage stormwater. And you can't have a bunch of debris and trees in because it's gonna stop the flow of the stormwater. You can have some, but
Is there any effort to reduce the width of the canal? For example,
not in our
the
district.
canal that flows through Decovenant Park, and I've run and walked and bicycled along there. That channel there is so wide, and I haven't seen water there in a long, long time. And there's just so much debris sitting in the actual channel. And I keep thinking, is this going to be cleaned out? You apparently say, no, we need to.
Some of it will be cleaned out. I think that the local governments, their tolerance for debris, some debris in the canal will sort of drive that. Josh did the coordinated operations and maintenance thing. How much debris and how often will they be removing it?
Yeah, so many of the jurisdictions are actually entering into a centralized maintenance contract. So contractors are coming in to clear debris from the channel, treat invasive weeds along the corridor, and then inspect and prune the trees. And so there is an ability to do that through these contracts as opposed to self-fulfilling and having the village staff be responsible for all of that maintenance. And so as a part of that, they're doing 3 passes of debris removal each year, where the contractor comes through to remove debris from the corridor. And I think particularly with all the cottonwood trees that we have up there today, there is quite a bit of debris. So you do it once and a few months later, you'll see some of the photos, the debris is back. But then we do 2 passes of weed spraying along the corridor, and then they do an inspection of the trees each year to determine if there are any safety risks.
And those passes will be along the whole canal.
So right now, those are just along the stretches that have opted in to agreements to manage stormwater in the canal, which is what Cherry Hills Village is evaluating.
Mhm.
But I think that piece that our team put together to create a combined service contract that did this basic maintenance is a really important piece that allows local governments to feel like they really know what the cost is to a certain extent. And I know that Jay was really pleased to see that moving forward because it's been an uncertain thing. But why don't I keep going, because I think some of your questions are going to be answered too.
Okay.
So this is the whole canal, and you see the different stormwater sections that have already been, those communities that have already adopted and gotten entered into IGAs, intergovernmental agreements with Denver Water to manage stormwater in the canal. You see Eisenhower Park, I'm going to show you pictures of that. Greenwood Village, Semswa, which is down in Littleton, the Horseshoe Park area, I'm reading from a distance here. Mirabel, which is out at Shea Properties out in Chatfield and Douglas County. And in total, there's about 10 miles of the Highline Canal that are currently being managed for stormwater. So your previous city manager very much wanted the village to learn from the other communities that were taking this on first. So the learning is coming right now, which is really nice.
So can I just clarify?
Yeah.
Because you're saying that there are 10 miles along this 71 that are already have this.
Here's the pictures of it.
They're the model.
They're your model. So,
And that picture is the purple.
yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Greenwood Village is a great learning example for you because communities are so similar. This is the Douglas County project, which is out at a new development that Shea Properties has put together called the Solstice Development. This was a developer-led project. This is the first project that went forward. They really transformed the canal in this area dramatically. It's something that your community, our community, would be very nervous to see. They laid back the banks of the canal. They didn't have any homes on either side. They didn't have as many cottonwoods. It hadn't been cared for. So it was an opportunity to expand the capacity and put more stormwater in. But this is an example of an inflow, a pretty big inflow into the canal. And then it's 3.5 miles. This is the city of Littleton's stormwater project by Windermere. Again, a very small developer-led project. This would be something if there was a small development. I don't think there's any land that big along the canal, like 2 or 3 homes that someone could bring forward. It's stormwater conveyance, so moving stormwater. 1 mile transformed. This was completed in June. I think there's a picture of it. Yeah. Josh and I were really excited when we saw this happening in Littleton. And so this is a little more similar to what you might see if it was a pretty large amount of water. And then that would be the inflows that we call those.
The outfall.
The outfall, sorry.
The inflow comes.
You know I'm not a technical person. So then we have the Southeast Metro Stormwater Authority. They manage stormwater in Littleton and Centennial predominantly. Again, a redevelopment initiated project. Construction is finished, isn't it, Josh?
No, they're still working on the
Okay.
site. Yeah.
So it's 1.5 miles. And this is a group led by the South Metro Fire, Inger, yeah? And they had just cleaned out the canal, Fred, in advance of the stormwater project starting, which many of the communities want to see the canal, cleaned out and improved prior to adopting stormwater. City of Greenwood Village, 2.5 miles transformed. Again, it's stormwater conveyance. It began in 2019 and it's a jurisdiction-led project. And here's the canal prior to the team cleaning it out. Look familiar, friend? And look how beautiful. Yeah.
Very good.
So that was required. The SIMSWA, we call them, that agency, they required that be done, and so the Conservancy helped organize that and put it together. The city and county of Denver, I think, is one of the most interesting and closest projects to you. It's probably the most thoroughly thought through and involved of the stormwater projects that we've seen other than Shea. So this is a jurisdiction-led project. It started way before any of the others except for Shea. Construction is almost complete. I've been down there a few times. Josh has been down there probably 100 times. It's a water quality project, and it's 1.5 miles, and we're going to show you some really neat images. So this is one of the berms that are being put in the canal, and you see that the gate up there that lifts up or goes down to manage the flow of the water if you're trying to keep it in the canal for longer for additional filtration. It looks very much like the head gates. So it looks a little frightening right now because it's just completed, but once it revegetates, it'll look quite natural. And Josh has these really great photos of it holding water. Really cool. This was just last week, is that right?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that's just to slow the flow down, right? 'Cause
And
this is flowing right down.
maximize the filtration. And then when the 100-year big storm surge occurs, you want to open that to allow it to move. And it's just a way to manage the water and the flow of the water. It's my understanding that the long-term goal is to automate those. They're not automated, right? Yeah. And then this is at the end of a road. We have some of these situations in Cherry Hills Village where a road goes right up to the end of the canal like that. So what they've done is, this is called a Forebay, right? Thanks. And it has little holes in it all along the lip to slow down the flow of the water and to keep the debris out of the canal. Okay, then they have equipment that can come in and clean out the holes and remove the debris. And this is definitely a pilot to see how all of this works, but this will help with the debris going down in the canal, and it's keeping that out. Pre-treating it, is that what you said? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So glad you're here. This is.
What's a carcinator?
What did you say?
Yeah, so that's the water quality vault. So in 2 locations in this project reach, this is pretty unique to the Denver section, they actually have pipes that drain into the canal currently. And the calcinator is a type of vault that removes sediment and other debris, and even actually can remove some of the oils and slicks from the water before it enters the canal. But it would only be used where there's a pipe discharge. So that's what's different. So these are for the street discharges, but if there was a pipe dumping in the canal, that would be a way to provide the same kind of pre-treatment.
Do they have that in Littleton?
No, so there are 2 in Denver. Those are the first 2 in the canal. Similar to the Forebays, these are the first to pre-treat water entering the canal.
So this is what the canal looks like on the other side of that image, okay? So that was put in, and then Josh has a really, it's not in here though, is it? The video?
No, that's a video.
Oh, what do I do to get it to?
Probably just click anywhere on it. Hopefully. Yep.
It has a nice
There
waterfall
you go.
effect.
We don't have the sound on. See the water going down?
Oh, nice.
God, that's a big snake. Jeez.
Okay, that was exciting. So, some of us get more excited about these things than others. So the putting water in the Highline Canal has a host of benefits, not just water for the trees, which is obviously, I think, the top line priority for many of us. Improving air quality, sequestering carbon, mitigating heat island by feeding those trees water that they need. But it's also reusing, old infrastructure that needs a functional purpose. What's the inside of the canal going to be like if we don't put water in it? And what if we're not going to just put water in it? It has to have a purpose. So has tremendous environmental health benefits. The 72-hour hold that's allowed to keep that water in there is estimated to filter the water and make it some 40% cleaner than it was when it went into the Highland Canal. Both through the natural filtration in the canal and the pretreatment that Josh was talking about. It improves wildlife habitat and it improves community health because we've got the water for the trees. And then there's cost savings when you compare green infrastructure to gray infrastructure, long term, right? So for Cherry Hills, I think it's a little challenging because it's existing water primarily that's being formalized in the Highline Canal. And people probably will say, well, we're not paying anything and all that water's going into the Highline Canal right now. So why should we spend this extra money? Well, Denver Water isn't gonna allow all that water to go in the canal and have this risk of flood long-term with everyone putting stormwater in the Highline Canal long-term. That's not good for the community. So they're pushing this very, very hard. And right now they're pushing it with a lot of carrots and a few sticks, but I think it's gonna get to be pushed more and more. And so I think it's really smart for the village to be moving forward with an analysis for all these benefits. And then Josh put this slide in. The team, like I said, that was supported through a wonderful grant, has been working very hard to try to quantify the benefits, because that's one of the problems we have sometimes when we talk about stacked benefits. Like, what is the dollar amount? So when you look to quantify it, the research that's been done, and Josh, I should have you up to talk about this because you're very knowledgeable.
Yeah, it's really a kind of a novel process to go through this triple bottom line analysis, but the water quality benefits, the idea is that if you were to take all of the stormwater that's entering the canal today and try to get it out of the canal and into the storm sewer system, into pipes, into traditional gray infrastructure, it would cost an additional $39 million more than the infrastructure to formalize the stormwater, the things we saw in the master plan, like the berms, the overflows, the spillways. So right off the bat, there are significant savings by retrofitting the canal, and so that's the value of treating that existing stormwater. The increased maintenance, we did it's a 50-year prospectus, and the increase is only that $1 million for the whole canal over 50 years, because the reality of maintaining the gray infrastructure is relatively similar to the green infrastructure on that period. The environmental benefits being the most significant with the preservation of the trees. And it's incredible when you start adding up the cost to remove all of those trees if there were no water in the canal. Denver Water can pay over $4,000 per cottonwood to take down a mature cottonwood tree along the canal. And so it's the avoided cost to remove those trees and then plant new trees in their stead. And then also looking at the wildlife habitat, the idea is that $25 million is the value if you were to go acquire 860 acres of wildlife habitat like we have now. And I believe actually we may have just used the riparian areas, which is about 730 acres. When you add up all 71 miles of the canal, it's really significant acreage. When you look at that 100-foot corridor, it may not feel like much, but when you start to look across the region, it's really significant. And then the health benefits, the idea there by revitalizing the canal, the users who live near the canal, providing some kind of access to recreation, that they would actually have savings. The CDC estimates that regular exercise can save you $250 a month on your insurance. We estimated this based on just 2.5% of the population. We wanted to be somewhat conservative about what the real health benefit is for users. And so this is just the first draft. This is kind of hot off the press now. We're still working on finalizing these numbers. But the idea being really looking beyond just that green versus gray comparison that the stormwater managers, I think, traditionally make decisions around and really understand those additional benefits and then attempt to quantify them. I think the maintenance cost is the piece that we're really working the hardest to dial in, and having these centralized maintenance contracts. They're spending about $8,000 per mile per year is the initial estimate outside of the tree care. And that's really the biggest variable. The village obviously has one of the most heavily treed sections of the canal. And so that's going to be, I think, the biggest variable in thinking about taking on the care for the trees, but also comparing it, as this model does, to the loss of those trees without water in the canal.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah.
The third one, community health benefits. I think that from my discussions with folks, just as a heads up, the number one thing that I hear about why not to do this is nobody wants to live next to a trash heap. And they look at this as, if I live at or near the canal, I'm just asking all this water to be drained in with all the attendant trash that comes along with it. And why is it that we want to bring ourselves to have all this trash in our neighborhood as a formality versus making something else happen. So when I look at your 3 items here, I think a hidden, concern of community health benefits is what I just said, which is people are concerned about living next to dumps.
Yeah, the 2 things that I would say, first for the village, it's unique because there's so much stormwater already entering the canal. So I think that can help folks feel a little more comfortable that the recommendations in the master plan are really to formalize the existing inflow. And so right now it's kind of maintaining that condition with the additional treatment through adding those berms. So the water quality improves and it's the same flow of water coming in. I think the other piece though is just the level of maintenance and management that you'll see. By entering into that centralized contract, the other jurisdictions are seeing 3 passes of brush removal, trash removal each year. Denver Water's level of care for the channel itself, typically they're doing maintenance just before a water run. And with the water runs becoming increasingly infrequent, that may just be 1 time per year that they're coming through to remove debris, remove trash. And so I think we are seeing a higher level of service in the stormwater sections now. The trick, I think, for you all being the transition of responsibility from Denver Water to the village, that's the piece that I think is challenging. But I think from a community standpoint in these stormwater sections, I think we're seeing a higher level of care. We were just talking about that at the stormwater meeting today. Denver Water, I think, took some issue with this idea that the level of care is elevated currently from where it was. But I think given
3 passes versus 1, they're only doing like 1 water run a year now.
Yeah, and then I think for us also the ability to bring volunteers, and I think you're all aware of our volunteer efforts, but to get volunteers engaged with that ongoing care as well. We can see even more than the 3 passes between our trash cleanups, brush removal projects that we're doing as well. We want to be a partner to be able to help elevate the level of care. So I think there's a way that by just seeing the canal as managed, both the stormwater being managed, but also the natural resources being managed, that actually may improve.
Well, and furthermore, it's really important for villagers to understand that there's pre-treatment. There's not going to be trash going in the Highline Canal. There won't be trash. There's probably more trash going in now than there would be if we formalized this at some of the areas where I see the water going in. There's no pre-treatment. There's nothing blocking out trash from coming in. Some areas I've seen a little gate over, some of them, it's kind of rookie, so this is going to be managing it, caring for it, and, your citizens, because of the transfer of the responsibility over time, the community is really going to, I think, lift this up. I was speaking at a large event with a group of mothers and daughters, and one of the science teachers at Kent is going to put a proposal forward for Kent to try to adopt a section themselves. I think you're going to see the elementary school, they're going to want to do this. Your kids, I know your kids want to do it. You already told me.
Just from a public relations standpoint, and maybe you're already doing this, and I apologize if I'm going over old ground, but in terms of maintaining and creating a well-maintained canal, I would concentrate your efforts on all those places where there's a bridge going over the canal from a parking lot. Because
really good point.
the Dahlia parking lot,
oh, I know.
if you walk over that bridge and look down, last year somebody threw their Christmas tree into the channel with tinsel still on it.
Well, you should see the
Up
north, you should see some of the garbage.
Well, rather than clean out the channel way up and away from everybody, concentrate on where those bridges are. Then when people come across the bridge, they think, oh, look what the Highline Conservancy is doing. That's great.
Yeah.
They'll never see that part of the canal that's 100 feet that way or that way. But they'll see it right here.
When the canal turns, it often collects more debris. There's a turn right there. So as we were talking about, when water flows, the debris comes down. So the turns in the canal usually have a lot of debris. And I've been in the canal cleaning it out many times. I think it's kind of fun because you get a different perspective on things. But focusing on the garbage and trees and things that aren't natural is really the first step, and then those are garbage cleanouts, and then the debris removal of some of the debris. But I think that's great advice. So we're working with this document and this presentation and within our organization to try to simplify the messaging so that when you all need to talk to your constituents and, folks from the community, you can explain it more easily. So we will also, I'm going to keep going, but we'll look forward to some feedback on how much we can simplify this. So the next steps for the village, which we talked about, the glass build, I'm just going to talk about first, which is to design and assess the costs that really are in the village and how they can be phased in, how you can work with Denver Water over a period of years to take on responsibility, what you can get, Denver Water and the Conservancy to do, to help you. I think those are really important considerations. I think the contract that's out is a terrific first step, as we already talked about. Next steps for the transformation of the canal in general is for us to get the grant again, which we're working on right now. We've gotten a good green light so far on that. And then transform more of the canal. I think we have a goal of 4 to 6 miles. I think it'd be bigger, I was thinking today, 5 to 10. People are learning. We have pathway guides and all sorts of things to help the local governments and developers evaluate the pilot projects. What's the learning lessons there? Understand the operations and maintenance. So learn from these pilot projects and the centralized maintenance contract. So you guys, I was wanting the village to move forward right away, but I understand now. What was your former city manager? Jim. He was smart because you're going into this with a lot more knowledge. And I want to just highlight this before you guys ask any other questions or give us feedback on simplification. And that's that the City Council will be considering the MOU for the Canal Collaborative. Remember how we mentioned that we're formalizing the collaboration? So that's the structure, and it would have both your city manager and another couple of staff people, I think Jay on Stormwater, and then one of the electeds as well, all involved, and someone from the rec side, you and Emily probably, I'm not sure who your appointees are. And so just want to give you a heads up on that too, which will help us sort of, have a structure for communication with all the governments. So, yeah, so we're here. What do you think about the simplification of the presentation to the general public? Sort of important, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, that's great. You covered a lot of territory there. That's great.
With my brainiac friend over here.
Now, I'll tell you, Harriet, without you,
Help yourself.
this wouldn't have gone anywhere. Seriously.
I had to learn a fair amount.
Yeah, but you had to persist. I'm sure like crazy when you go home at night and Mike says, "Why are you in such a bad mood?" Well, I couldn't make any headway today, but you've made a lot of headway.
I really appreciate that, thanks. We all do. We have a great team.
Yeah, you
And the
do.
local governments, there's been incredible leadership from some of these local governments, many of them. A lot of champions like we're trying to develop today.
So I also noticed that some of these projects are run by developers, and I
Yeah.
just assume there's no option for that in this village.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. Where would it be? Oh, I know where it could have been. I don't know what is the current status of the development down by the Nazarene Church, or we're not allowed to talk about that anymore. I mean, my husband's had a planning consulting, but we don't talk about any of this.
God, I'm trying to remember, I'm sorry, that's my.
I feel like it hasn't been determined, but that's an opportunity.
Yeah, it's coming back before city council, but I'm in the next couple of months, but I'm not sure of the date.
Yeah, and I think the problem there-
It might end up being a private transaction and then we
Oh.
not be involved.
Yeah, so the problem there is that they probably don't want to enter into a developer district, which they'd have to do with, and then sign an IGA as a district with Denver Water. But maybe they would. Because right now, the problem is that the village, your structure hasn't run its course. So you're not ready yet to accept the stormwater. So, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, and I might mention, I think the Littleton project is a good example,
Yeah, it is.
because it was a one property that divided into 3 lots, And by doing that, they had to install it. It was a more rural part of Littleton, so they had to put in a curb and gutter. So there was an open ditch that ran in front of the property. And when they put in the gutter, they were managing stormwater from the south of the canal. So they said, wait a sec, do we have to manage the property from this subdivision? And so Littleton teamed up with the developer to then formalize that inflow, and we saw the outfall into the canal. And so that is a nice example of, like if a single lot were to be subdivided and maybe there's a larger development with some additional stormwater, a chance to discharge into the canal. And I know, in the village you all require detention and pre-treatment on site, so could some of that treatment eventually happen in the canal because the canal is able to provide treatment? I think those are the kinds of questions that the consultant can look at through the kind of review of the model.
We had wanted, when the two properties were developed at the end of Mansfield, as you're headed and you run into the canal, there were two properties being developed in there at the same time, and both of the landowners were interested in talking to us because the cost that they had to invest, sort of like, I think I've told you guys before, that one property owner along the canal spent over $300,000 building a detention pond just to keep their water out of the canal. So I think those folks didn't spend quite as much money, but still, that money could have been captured by the village and invested into this $800,000.
Well, in the Littleton example, did they form a special district to offset those costs?
So they paid for the infrastructure to allow the stormwater in the canal, and Littleton signed the IGA, so Littleton now maintains this 1 mile. So if the village were to eventually enter into an IGA with Denver Water, then the village could authorize additional stormwater to enter the canal. Because the key is that the stormwater is only allowed to be formalized if there's a municipality or a district that's able to maintain the canal. So that's the commitment you need to make.
I have a couple questions from the presentation.
Please.
This is a good time.
We're both here.
Okay, so first of all, great job. This was super thorough, and I feel like I have a good high-level conceptual understanding of this model, so I appreciate that. So just to better understand, the $800,000 that you mentioned, plus the $8,000, plus the pre-maintenance, so let's call it $850 maybe. In that instance, is that something that's just for the village stretch, and how are you approaching that? So you mentioned like gaining kind of constituents for this and having some support in the village. Is that because it's going to be a bill? Is that just going to go through city council? Is that like, is the village just going to fund that? Is that going to be split amongst, taxes? Like how are you going to fund that? And the second question to that is, so that's a small stretch of it, and then there's 62 miles left of undone space, maybe a little bit less with this particular stretch, but what are the other municipalities going to do to fund it? And does one impact the other? So like if the village does it, great, and it passes here, then the other stretches along the canal, if they don't, does that mess up the chain? So those are kind of.
They can be distinct. Each of the projects can be distinct. It's not as if Greenwood Village does it means you have to do it. So they're all separate. Each of the local governments, with the exception of the developer-led projects, are funding it. I haven't heard any of them increasing a tax for it. I know that was on a draft questionnaire for the master plan. I think that, the village, this is my opinion, I think the village, not the Conservancy's opinion, I think the village can look at, the South Suburban monies, that this might be something. Remember, it's a one-time $800,000 cost, and it may end up being less. As Ellen comes in, there may not you may not need to have the water quality berms, for example. Some of them are not doing those right away. Some of them are allowed by Denver Water in the IGA to taper in, to try 1 mile and to test it out, and then a couple years later you take on the rest of it. And so there's some savings that could be had, but and some timelines that can be looked at. And then the ongoing maintenance costs are something that the Conservancy is hoping we can help a little bit with. I don't want to overcommit, but we are creating a fund to help local governments and Denver Water exiting from responsibility. They've made a huge commitment to this, and so we're not really ready to unveil that yet, but we're hoping we can be helpful to a small extent with some of those ongoing costs.
Okay, so that one time, let's just go $100,000. If you were not to be able to procure that, then that is a scenario that you showed us earlier, the canal without water and without those trees.
Yeah, and I want to just further touch on, you know, what would happen with Denver Water if you weren't to long-term, sometime over the next 5-10 years or whatever, take on this responsibility for stormwater. I think it's really important to understand that Cherry Hills Village has a lot of stormwater going in the canal, which is a flooding risk, long-term. So you have to manage your flooding risk. That's not our responsibility, it's not Denver Water's responsibility, and here's a way to help you manage all the flows that are already going in the canal. It's important to kind of,
See, I look at it the opposite direction. We may not even have enough water in general anymore.
Right.
And it's important to just maintain and preserve the water that we use. So on both sides,
Yeah.
same of the issue.
And I might say, I think with the consultant review that they'll do, they can prioritize some of that infrastructure, refine the cost for the 800,000. That includes some of the design engineering costs too, so it is probably on the high end. I think Mile High Flood District is a really strong potential funding partner.
thanks for mentioning.
Yeah, so if you come out of that kind of master plan review and the consultant says you have to do the overflows in the spillway and then the berms can be phased in over time, it allows you to create a capital plan and then get that into the Mile High Flood District plan for matching funds on that. And with them so closely involved in the project, I think they could really help with some of that prioritization then to understand first you mitigate the flood risk, and then once that's taken care of, then you can add the water quality features over time because there's not as much urgency on those. And then, the distinction, the 800,000 is the one time, but then that, the plan estimated it's 15,000 per mile per year, so that, 52,000 per year, that's really the, I think, significant number to think about that commitment in perpetuity. And that was, I think, Jim had put that memo forward about the South Suburban funds as a potential use for those. And I think you'll see with that the ability to really care for the canal at a level that we're not seeing today. So there are some benefits to that beyond the stormwater.
And also that estimate doesn't take into account the potential this community, I would say in particular, has for citizen care. So it could reduce the ongoing maintenance if it got coordinated and organized well, which I think it could.
I appreciate you mentioned a few avenues for funding this, so I think that's great. And also for the in perpetuity portion as well, the one-time cost. But if you ever need, support from the Ptrc, just keep us posted if it goes to.
Yeah, well, are any of you on the master planning? Oh, good. Good, both of you are. So I think that that's going to be really critical how you frame this question. If you want public input on the question in a questionnaire, it's going to be hard.
Well, it is in fact one of the questions that I will give in my report is there's a meeting coming up where we're scoping, trying to get more and more input on things like this trade-off of how much do you want open space and what are you willing to do to get it. So it goes hand in glove with the idea of the funding sources and the obligations that come with it. So I think that knowing this information is important because it helps you prioritize what open space projects the village wants to be involved with. So in that vein, if I could take 2 seconds, I just want to put in one place in my mind, again, sort of the budget side, what I think I heard, and that is, right now, we estimate a $800,000 capital improvement for our structures and overflow infrastructure. A one-time shot for what you have listed on the map already.
That's right.
I think we had talked before, and I would still be in favor of having an overflow structure at Quincy Farm because I think it's a natural place to put some extra water. I know that one place affects the whole model, but at the same time, it seems like an awfully easy place. It ends up putting water sort of on the front side of Kent, whereas where it's currently structured in the back goes down into Kent Pond. And we've already seen what happens in a 100-year flood at Kent Pond, and where it comes out over here is already a problem. So if we could move some of that water and not rely as much on Kent. Now, I also understand that the people who are down gradient from Quincy Farms may not love having additional water coming that way, even in a 100-year flood event. But it's got to come from the canal, it's got to cross Quincy Farm. We already have a pond at Quincy Farm
That's great.
that needs some input or an inflow. I know we have 72 hours only, but at the same time, it is a potential storage place and recharge area. So I still would personally like to advocate for something about Quincy Farms, because I think it can also be an educational tool and just go hand in glove with what it is that we're trying to do with Quincy Farms. But $800,000 capital improvement, one-time shot, and then I had O&M, originally I thought I heard you say $8,000, but then I didn't hear what the time duration was. Is that per month?
No, 18,000, or it's gonna be 8,000 per mile per year.
Per mile?
Is the, yeah, and that's the current contract. That doesn't include the tree care. So that's where the two numbers that we used, 15,000 was the estimate in the plan, all encompassing. So part of the benefit of having this contract playing out, this was the first year of the contract. Next year, hopefully we'll have more partners involved. We'll keep refining those costs.
Well, and also, the reason why I think it's important to separate the 8,000 from the larger number with the trees put in is because you guys are already spending money on trees. So you need to look at what you're already doing before you just add that in.
So right now, we're talking $8,000 in maintenance, i.e. the 3-time trash pickup, moving rocks around, generally cleaning the channel. Is $8,000 per mile, and we have how many miles in the village?
3.6.
Okay, so we're about 30 grand a year.
And we said 15 with the tree.
30 grand plus tree care,
Mhm.
which, you know, I guess it depends on how much you're currently spending.
55.
Well, and really, the 36,000 would be a better.
Okay, and that includes the O&M on the head gates? Or on our
Not the-
infrastructure channels?
On the new infrastructure, but it doesn't actually include the Denver water
Well,
infrastructure.
Denver Water is gonna be closing off all those head gates, so they're responsible for those still.
Well, and I wasn't even talking about those, I was talking about literally,
The
so
new
the picture of
structures.
the ones that are in the,
Yeah.
we're not just talking about in between the
Yeah,
structures.
so it includes the
We're talking about
permanent.
dredging out whatever sediment is
Yeah.
building up behind those periodically.
Yep, that's right.
And my only comment on that is to the extent that we have the one picture you showed us of big, huge rocks that are kind of ragged. Yeah, it slows water down, but it's a real pain in the rear to try and clean out.
Yeah.
So if you can somehow have a smooth surface at the end where all the sediment actually accumulates and a rough surface to slow the water down above it, then you might get the best of both worlds with the sedimentation as well as having an easier clean out and
Well, those rocks are simply for, you know, vanity, you know, for attractiveness. And so the actual structure is just the cement that you would, you know, use as a functional purpose. And so if you really don't have to put that many in, that would reduce your cost of the installation. And there's different models that are acceptable. Some people wanted them grassed over. I can't imagine the cost of that, you know, with wrap to make them look really natural. A cool thing about them, if it can be worked out that they go, if they're needed in the village, which it looks like they are, is that if they go at the end of a street, they could be used as a low water crossing if you go back to the way it looks, which is kind of cool. It's more access across the canal because you know how expensive the bridges are.
i.e. at the end of Mansfield where it hits the canal where we've been talking about.
Yeah, that would be
The
great.
difficulty of how hard it is to get across the canal.
Yeah.
And how expensive it would be, we've talked about that in the past.
Josh, where was that one?
It's
So,
in the Denver.
Although at the Mansfield location, it's these big concrete blocks.
Those are just temporary from
I
Denver
know, but
Water.
you can easily step across them and it
Yeah.
allows the water
Oh,
to
I
go
know.
through.
I know, so here it is, so you can see if you look at it up close, that it can be made wide enough, the cement, that you can walk right across. That would be such a great solution for kids, and you guys could even have a sign that it was a little wider, the cement was a little wider there.
well, and I'm talking about in the video that you had, or the picture you had before
This one?
this one here, the way it's so rough with all
Oh, I
the
know.
lines. That's all I'm talking about. I understand the concrete idea.
A
But
lot of people just like the concrete because it's more true to the functionality. You know, to water utility.
Do you have a way to ballpark annual cost of tree removal in the canal for the city?
Right now, we spend about $4,000 just on hazard reduction pruning. So yeah, I mean, removal would be pretty hard to ballpark, because 2 big cottonwoods go down, that's $8,000, depending on where they're at. I mean, Denver Water had to bring a crane in for one of them over by Dolly Hall Park, and now, I don't know how much that would
They can be
cost.
as much as
Probably
4,000.
10 or 12.
4,000
A
per
big
tree.
cottonwood.
Yeah,
But-
probably more than that with the crane. especially the side of Crane Head Green
Yeah.
over there, that was a big one.
So
Some
those
of the-
costs to the city would be eliminated in this scenario?
No, so right now Denver Water is responsible for the majority of tree care. We just spend a little bit extra above and beyond so that we can react a little bit quickly to when something happens, the limb looks dangerous over the trail or something like that. So under this model, we would be taking over that tree care that Denver Water does, in
Right,
addition
I
to what
see.
we do now. Yeah.
And we don't want to brush over the potential costs of the tree care. I would say that many of the local governments that have entered into agreements have negotiated with Denver Water to remove many trees that needed to be, that they knew would need to be removed in years to come prior to accepting responsibility. So that's an approach. I would say that citizens get really unhappy if you remove trees before it really looks like they're dying or dangerous. So it's, it's hard.
The only other thing I wanted to do real quick is just remind everybody that we talked about the $25,000 study a lot of time. I think, Chelsea, you might have been not on commission at that point, but I wanted to ask you guys to give us kind of the 2-minute update on what that $25,000 was for, or if you want to, Emily, that what that $25,000 study that council provided in order to study, was it structures, what's it for again?
Josh, you remember maybe?
So are you referring to the $25,000 that's in the budget right now for the study we're doing right now?
Correct.
Yeah, so council budgeted $25,000 this year for us to do a more in-depth study of stormwater in the High Line and study each of these structures, kind of go into a little bit above and beyond where the full High Line study went, so that we have a really firm idea of what the costs are going forward, and like Josh and Harriet were just saying, whether or not each of those berms is required in that place, or whether there's some flexibility about what we install first, and to really drill down on all of the costs associated with it.
And Rob, you'll remember, Commissioner, you'll remember that there was a lot of discussion about flooding in the community in general, and that this needed to be looked at within that context. So this is also going to address that. And I think that the point that you just brought up about the potential at Quincy Farm, I would encourage you all to talk to the selected consultant about that idea. There's ways to possibly, within water law, really use this to the benefit of the community. The ponds at 3 Pond and so forth, I know it gets very complicated, so whoever you select will look at the overall floodplain within the community and the current flows and problems you've had in the past in light of this. And that was some of the concerns I think that the city manager had and folks had early on. Yeah. Oh, the Mayor Chrisman was very, very concerned about the impact of this on other problems in the community.
So something that's specifically called out in the RFP that we have out right now is that the modeling is going to go a little bit beyond what was done in the original study to make sure that there aren't impacts to neighboring properties and even outside, even one over from that, to really make sure that when we go ahead and make these changes, that we're not impacting other community members.
And I assume the Conservancy loves that idea, just to confirm it.
And
No
look
one
at
wants
this-
to impact adjacent
Yeah.
properties.
And look at it as a system, because I think it's been looked at as the canal system, but not as much reaching out into the individual communities. So to look at your challenges and opportunities, Clearview is such a perfect example of that. What does an overflow at 3 Pond mean for that pond, for flooding on Quincy? I think to look beyond just the corridor and really see the bigger impact is exciting. And then another piece that was added too is to look at, with the flood mitigation structures, the overflows and the spillway, what capacity is created in the canal to accept additional inflows. So really understanding how once those improvements are made, what additional capacity does the canal have for more stormwater to come in if there were those really redevelopment opportunities nearby.
And finally, I wanted just to confirm that I think I heard you say that the Mile High Flood Control District has the opportunity for matching funds to help us fund the maintenance obligations that we were talking about before that are in the $8,000 per mile or 15,000, maybe not tree coverage, but on the, at least the 8,000 per mile is a
I'm not sure
potential
if they
source
come
for
up with the
that.
maintenance, but they would be a source of potential funding for the improvements. So for the capital, the 800,000.
Okay, not on the $8,000 for the ongoing O&M.
Right, and so if
It's
you,
on the capital.
I don't think they do the ongoing, but they
They
might
do
on
O&M
occasion.
projects, like they'll
I
fund
know.
like a big like Russian olive removal or something that's maybe lowers the cost of weed
They
control
did,
for a
like,
year or something.
you guys had them, they did the cleaning out of 3 Pond many years ago, and they've cleaned out some other ditches.
Yeah, and for the commission's context, they contributed both to the planning and the actual construction of John Mead Park, $300,000 over the course
There you
of
go.
that project's lifetime, because it is a water quality and stormwater property
You
area.
guys probably aren't requesting, all the time, so,
We're not.
yeah.
And then, I don't know that we mentioned, but they're actually holding that centralized maintenance
Yeah.
contract as well. So that's the other benefit that we have, is that they are contracting with those 3 contractors and pooling the funds from all of the jurisdictions. And so that's another really great function that they're providing, is they're the kind of centralized, kind of holder of those centralized contracts.
And within that canal collaborative structure, Mile High Flood is sort of the leader of the stormwater team. We're facilitating and managing, but they are the kind of technical leaders of that, because it's not our, So we have that kind of blanket of expertise that I think is so important.
And he's too modest to tell you, but Commissioner Rudinsky's wife and daughter were shown in one of your pictures.
Right down at the Covens Park, right?
That's so cute.
Yeah, they had a blast doing it, they'd love to do more.
Hey, did you guys see the half-mile marker? One
I
of
did.
you wanted that, yeah.
Not yet, but now I know to go that way.
Yeah, did you know I showed?
All right, so thank you. So I guess the bottom line on this is we do have some capital costs that the city has to figure out whether or not to take on. Is the commitment for those costs bound up in the MOU, or is the MOU not a commitment of dollars?
That's really interesting. I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
think they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, so the other role that the flood district plays is that they maintain this model. And so if you were to formalize your stormwater, it's likely they would require you to address the flood risk. So I would say the water quality note would not be required as a part of the IGA, but I'm not sure you'd be able to sign an IGA without addressing the flood risk.
So
Because part of the,
Spillways.
the review of the IGA is Mile High Flood District would look at the model. So for instance, if you wanted to add more water, you can't add additional stormwater if it's going to cause flooding down the canal. And so the flood district's responsible for that intellectual review.
Are you asking about the MOU that council is about to sign in November?
Correct.
Oh, no,
That
no, no,
is not
thanks.
associated.
Sorry.
That does not bind us financially or time-wise to anything beyond what we're doing now.
No, that's just a structure for coordinating together.
Right.
Sorry.
Sorry, I thought you meant the IGA that you might sign with Denver Water later if they
Right, well, I
require-
think it's 2 phases, because we heard in the last city council meeting a number of financial obligations that the city may want to take on. And so I will mention this in my report, but I'll just preview it now, that there are a number of tasks that we need to choose, budget priorities and whether or not we're gonna take them on. So if that MOU was a commitment of money, which it's not, and that's something that's coming before us right now, then obviously we have to address that in all of our plans when we look at other budget items that may come along.
Yeah.
It's not, so it doesn't matter right now.
The only financial commitment in the MOU is $10,000 of support for the Highline Canal Conservancy on an annual basis, which is what we already do. So it's not so there is a small financial commitment, but it's not a change.
And
what,
I mean, if I could just say, please think about the commitment to the, to the stormwater transition over a period of time. Like, if you just start throwing that large number out, it may not end up being as large. And we've seen the jurisdictions, like one of them is doing like one little section, and then they have like 2 more years in the IGA with Denver Water to finish the rest. So it can be phased in your budgeting planning.
Well, and again, that's an important comment, because when you hear the number of things that are open space issues and financial commitments coming before us, if you don't have to spend $800,000 tomorrow, but you can bite it in 3 bites, it really changes the picture of whether or not you're willing to take something on.
And you can get urban drainage to pay for.
And you might even be able to minimize by
20%.
having urban drainage take on a piece of it.
Yeah.
So the takeaway from me is, A, it may not be quite that much, and B, you may get matching funding. But I do think it's important for all of us to be able to understand what it is, because the mayor made comments in Tuesday night's meeting that we have some very difficult decisions to make about funding. And specifically, the comment came up about the former South Suburban money. There are a whole lot of people that have interest for their project on that money. This is potentially one of them that we heard tonight, but there are a number of other people that kind of want a piece of the action. And I'd like to think that we're kind of the stewards. I know Emily's shaking her head or not, but
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make it really clear to the commission that South Suburban money is a bill we are no longer paying. So it's not a chunk of money that we're getting that we get to decide, we got $200,000 or whatever the number is, that's not the number. What are we going to do with it? It's a bill we're not paying anymore. So there's slightly more money in the parks budget because we're not paying that bill, but it is not a chunk of money that we are receiving that we are deciding what to do with. So as of now, it's absorbed into the parks budget because it's just there because we're not paying anymore.
right.
But it's not money that's coming in.
I appreciate that, and I think it's an excellent point, because it's not a new bill, but it's no longer an expenditure that we were making, and lots of people have their eyes on that amount of money that is sitting in the parks budget for different projects, including potentially, whether we can move that out of the parks budget and somewhere else. So all I'm saying is, we need to be alert. We need to the extent that we think as this commission that we want to see it stay for parks open space, we need to be the ones to kind of express what projects we all think are the right projects that it should go to. Enough said.
One last comment. Another source of funding to support not probably the infrastructure, but to support the tree care and possibly some other aspects of the care of the canal is Arapahoe County open space. For sure. There's a history of Arapahoe County open space helping with trees. They did a match to each of the local jurisdictions in Arapahoe County a number of years ago in a pool of funding that we put together with Denver Water that's, helped maintain trees. So that is an excellent source. We're going to be proposing another review of all the trees on the Highline Canal, the condition and assessment of them, so that people like your jurisdiction can understand sort of what that look is. So we're proposing that in our budget for next year in our work plan too. And that would set us all up nicely to go back to Arapahoe County as a group for a match request for a certain amount of tree care, so.
So just one last question. So just so that I understand, so these funds are they're competitive at this point, ultimately, right? Because lots of different projects are looking to these funds to help support their agenda, right? So if that's the case, for instance, you mentioned maybe Kent Ever might have an interest in sponsoring a portion, maybe CHBE. So I'm just thinking about maybe our contribution to helping, because trees are super important to me. So if you weren't to receive the funds to the city, is Plan B to go to the schools, to go to Arapahoe open space, like to go to different urban drainage, different sources and sort of ask for portions and then potentially match? I'm just curious kind of the Plan B. And for example, if I went to the school, the elementary, to with you, maybe to talk with them about it, I was just curious.
Yeah, the Conservancy has, the 71 miles of the Highline Canal at our core of our mission to preserve, protect, and enhance, but we don't want to be the organization that is taking on the maintenance of the Highline Canal. We're a little nonprofit. It's just not really appropriate. It really lies with government. But we have, and I mentioned that we'll be able to unveil more, a fund that we're going to be creating that will help with the care of the canal in a way, maybe like matching funds to local governments and stuff like that, that will come from private sources and Denver Water. But we could potentially in years to come play a bigger role in maintenance of the canal, but at this point in our organization, I think it would be way too much if we let a little weigh in, by that. But, you guys could create a fund. You all, you're gonna have, hopefully, an ability to partner with nonprofits that are centralized just to the village that possibly could do that. We wanna care for our section of the canal more. Can this nonprofit help us raise money in a little fund that could spit off, 10 grand a year out of a little endowment? I think it's a good idea. I think you've got the community here, but I don't think it would be smart for us to do that just within, just for Cherry Hills, you know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah. But I think there's definitely the resources to care for the canal, and as you guys know, it's the gem of the community. We all know it. So I think you should advocate loud and effectively, and we're here as partners. Yeah. So thanks, and you're now champions. But both of us can go to any little community meetings or anything as this kind of starts to populate in the bigger community now that COVID's dying down a bit.
How do we sign up for the fundraiser so we can all get shirts?
I want you to do this. Will you
Do
write
we go to the
your
Conservation Association?
Mike Lemaire is gonna send you an email. He's gonna do a ride.
Well, only because of that, for everybody, so it's in the record. Is there a link that people
Yes.
can do to sign up?
It's highlinecanal.org/walk.
Should be, if it's not that, it should be. But yeah, it's our Walk for the Canal
Here, I'm gonna send
fundraiser.
it, I'm gonna pull it up right now.
Okay, so that is what they sign up for and participate in, and one of the things that they can get is a shirt.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's new this year's Bike for the Canal.
Yeah, so this is
It's how you
Bike
get
for the
bike
Canal, but
jersey.
you have to sign up for Bike, which costs a little bit of money compared to the Walk is free to sign up for. But you can also just buy the jersey. Yeah, I'm gonna send you the link, Rob, or I'll send it to you.
Send it to Emily, so it's on behalf of
Okay.
everybody in the village.
Okay, we'll let you guys get on with your evening. Thanks for all the time and for being willing to listen to this. I know it's involved.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you so much, guys. We're excited for the future, and I know we have to go slowly, right?
That's why the program's called STEP.
Yeah.
Stormwater Transformation and Enhancement Program. It's one step at a time. It'll probably take years, but I think it'll happen. It's already happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, you
Thank
guys.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, bye.
And then shall we go on to the next phase of trail renaming?
Sure.
Okay. How's that? So are you gonna,
Fred,
show us
we'll
these?
let you just take it away. You need no introduction.
Okay, well, I thought what I would do, because Chelsea, you weren't here when we first started this trail naming project. So that I kind of took that on because that's my shtick, that's my deal. In the beginning, it struck me because of my walking that I thought, the trail signs that we have right now that have these numbers on them, they don't mean a thing to most people. I've asked and they have no idea. These numbers actually correspond to residential addresses that happen to be near a particular trail, if that means anything. So we started out with the village trail, 6 miles through the village. You saw what that looked like. And it has all these red dots represent a trail sign on it. There are a few places on the village trail that still need the right signs. We're not 100% there, but generally speaking, it stays in the village, doesn't cross any major streets, so it's relaxing for people to walk it, to bike it, run it, whatever. So from the signs, I went on to decide, I made up these 8 different named trails within the village. And we've been over this before, and I think I've explained that to you. The mileages, the time it takes to walk each one of these in different parts of the village. They all represent, well, in many cases, loops. But then the stage that I wanted to do now was to just take one trail and completely figure it out, signage-wise, sign, locations, everything. Chelsea's going to pass out to you. I just finished this for the Woody Hollow Park Trail. And I went through it. There are 9 different sign locations on the Woody Hollow Park. There you go. And that first picture, photograph inside the cover, you know, we had these trail register boxes. That was a good idea in the beginning, but those are going to go away now because there's really no use for them after the novelty wore off and people wrote on the notebook that's inside. It's that sort of ran its race and it's over. So the Woody Hollow Park Trail goes from right here to Woody Hollow Park. It's 1.4 miles, takes 30 minutes to walk it. There are 9 different, on the yellow map there are 9 different sign locations, starting at South Franklin Street in the lower left-hand corner, goes down to Woody Hollow Park, turns north, and goes up to the end of South Vine Way. And each one of those numbers are then in detail throughout this little booklet. So you can tell it's signpost number 1, for example, where I think the new signpost should be, and the little red arrow means that's the face on the side of the signpost where these information plaques should be. I also think at every single sign location, we should have a trash can. In fact, today, on a walk, I picked up 2 poop bags that were literally sitting on top of fence posts. That's a new one to me. And the reason I think people ignore, one of the reasons I think that people can't seem to throw these away in the proper place is there is no proper place within a great distance. So if you put a new trash can at every one of these sign locations, 9 of them, the city wouldn't have to come by and empty those trash cans for a long, long time, but at least it provides a place for people to throw their trash rather than just discarding it on the trail. So it just walks through signpost number 1, and it's right down, it goes down to Woody Hollow Park. It's a quarter of a mile, takes 5 minutes. And I just walked through the whole way. I borrowed the engineering department's measuring wheel. And so these distances are exact between each sign location. And the 3 things that I think we have to constantly remind people: you've got to have your dog on a leash, you've got to pick up your poop bags, and there are no e-bikes allowed on our bridle trails. Well, actually, there are no e-bikes allowed in Cherry Hills at this point. I know that doesn't make Aaron happy, but at least it's consistent with our Cherry Hills charter, if you've ever taken the time to read what that charter says, and then you think about e-bikes, you think, no, e-bikes should not be in Cherry Hills. So, do you have any questions on that? I didn't mean to go through this signpost by signpost, but,
These are permanent, right? These are on that fixed structure you're showing, like the trail with the house numbers. I mean, these are very permanent. These signs you're proposing, right? They're not temporary in any way.
the signs with the house number?
Well, with the no e-bikes and all of this verbiage.
Well, these are little signs, the ones that are framed in black. Those would be posted on the main signpost.
Okay.
It's much like this sign here. These are the little plaques that go beneath the name of the trail,
Yeah.
okay? And that's these distance and time plaques, as well as the dogs must be on leash. Now, I know the big wooden signs here in the village say dogs must be on a leash. The problem is, there are not very many of those signs. And I think people have to be constantly reminded when they come to a sign, what trail they're on, and please throw away your poop bags in the proper place. I mean, it drives me crazy. I just don't get it. And if people are happy with this, then the idea is to do this same trail marking exercise on every single one of these trails. That's gonna take some time, but it touches every part of the village, so nobody can say, well, geez, why am I left out? Now, sure, the Highline Canal, this red line here, is the village trail, and all these trails, for the most part, connect to the village trail. There are a few that are isolated, like Woody Hollow, Oxford Trail, but every other one here, I think, at some point attaches to the village trail.
So that sign on the right is what you're proposing, right? That kind of a layout, right? Just that aesthetic. So the very right-hand picture
Yeah,
would have all the information that you're suggesting, and it would look something like that, right?
yeah,
Potentially.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I know this also has the leash your dog and clean up after your dog, and I guess what I'm saying is, I think we need to eventually get to a more consistent sign plan here in the village. We've got all these different
Yeah.
signs around.
So I'm in total agreement with everything you're saying. I don't know what those numbers mean. They don't really have a lot of meaning. I think people do need more reminders. Totally agree on the trash cans. Completely understand all the messaging. My only point or question there is just, there's a bit of a sign overload there, and I'm concerned about the effectiveness.
Right.
Because people are usually talking or with their families or biking, and they have an instant blank to see a message. And if
Right.
there's one solid, quick message, like whether it's 0.25 miles to this point, or it's leash your dog, or it's no e-bike, whatever it is, they might catch it if it's one quick message. So that's what I'm thinking through. It's just the
Right.
effectiveness of it, not the messaging itself. Like the messaging seems, I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, it's also occurred to me that maybe our sign posts in the village, maybe they should be taller than what they are now. And maybe, I even started out with coloring the whole top of it in a bright yellow or something, so that people at a distance, they can say, oh, there's a signpost, let's head for that. And all around the village, they begin to think, those are the signposts telling me where I am.
And that's a great point, because if they become known for something that's of value for people, they'll look at it.
Yeah.
And then the subsequent messages are more likely to get read as a
Yeah.
result of the fact that they know that this yellow sign means it's gonna tell me information that I need.
That's right.
Then, oh, by the way, no e-bikes, oh, by the way, leash your dog, oh,
Yeah.
by the way, right?
You can't see these signs right now
Yeah,
until basically you're standing right in front of it.
yeah,
You can't see it from a distance.
yeah,
But that's just
they
my
blend,
own
they
thought.
definitely blend with landscape.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, Fred, if I may. At point number 4 and point 5 on the map that you're showing where it turns there on southwest corner of St. Mary's Academy, basically, number 5. You took it north to the south side of Cherrymore. We've had a lot of discussion in the past about the trail that continues east up to University,
Right.
and then with the bridle path actually continuing to the west right there. And I guess my only question is we've kind of avoided the issue of safety on that crossing of University.
Right.
And do we want to try and force the issue? Because that brings, from a connection standpoint, it really opens you up to being able to integrate into a whole lot of trails
Right,
as you move to the east.
that's correct.
That we do not have quite the same connectivity by going north up to Cherrymore and then across at the existing light. The only way I would propose going across University is if it was done in conjunction with CDOT to try and have some kind of a safe passage across University. Because we all know nobody's going to step foot in University right now without a light.
I disagree, and here's why. I've crossed there at University on what I call a Cherry Trail, which on signpost number 5 here, that's the trail that goes east up to University. I've crossed University, Rob, hundreds of times right there. It is not an unsafe crossing as it currently exists. Many times I get there and yet I look out and I look left, I look right, think I could crawl on my hands and knees, I'd be fine. Otherwise, you wait for a break in the traffic. We don't need to have a light. We don't need to have a crosswalk painted on the street. We need to have a sign on both sides of University that says, cross with caution. It's just common sense.
So my
You
only
wait for a
question
break.
to you then is why did you not take the trail east and use that versus going north? And I'm not saying I want it that way, I just wanted to know what the thought process was.
Because I'm going to the village center.
You can get to the village center that way.
Well, sure, you can get to the village center in many ways, but this was the common way of getting to the village center, utilizing all the trails, existing trails, to the west of University. And then you cross right here at the light, and that's it. You don't have any other crossings. And it just makes sense to me. Sure, you can go up to University and walk down the sidewalk by St. Mary's to get there. But that's not as pretty as being on a trail the whole way, which you are the way it's designed here. I'm trying to keep this as much on trails and as little as I can on paved bike paths vis-a-vis sidewalks. Let's utilize the trails that we have.
So had we gone across on Bridle Path and crossed University and gone down Bridle Path Lane, so to speak, you would have eventually hooked into
The Glenmore Trail, as I've indicated it here. The Cherry Trail, which I've called just because it's between Cherry Ridge and Cherry Hills Farm. It starts on signpost 5 there. There would be a plaque on the sign that says begin Cherry Trail.
But what I'm saying is, you would have gone, according to the map that Emily brought up, it would have been crossing onto Trail 4724, and it would have taken you basically out and around Cherry Ridge, and then circled back. Would have added a substantial amount of length to the trail. So maybe it's not as beneficial and as, quote, quick to use the village center as the center of the spoke and everything goes out. But it was another alternative.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And as we've talked in the past, there are a couple of trails here in the village that don't go anywhere and will never go anywhere. And we had the discussion with Thomas Berry in here on the Armstrong property, and you know that was unfortunate the way that had to end up. But that's a trail that's never gonna go anywhere, but we're very reluctant to give up that right of way, that easement. And there are a couple of others that are like that. So, I'm not, this isn't in stone. If somebody has a better idea of how we can delineate a trail here, that's fine.
I really like your idea of the colors. So the color thought is if you look even at your map or anytime we're planning, like a planner thinks, colors are just a brilliant way to know differences, right? And so like yellow for marking a trail, blue for a rules sign, and green for a note of distance. So each different purpose, each different sign purpose has a different color. In a visual world, in a place that's more and more visual since technology, I think people would understand it and it would sink in more and it would be more impactful. That's just my opinion. So I like everything you set up. It makes a lot of sense to me, all of it. It's just how people are gonna process it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, once this is completed, then we have to redo our trails map. And I know we have thousands of them left.
We've gone through a surprising amount in the last year, so we have a lot left, but we have handed a lot out.
There are a half a dozen different mistakes on that map that I found, so
Yeah.
the whole thing just needs to be done right again. But the size is right, although it probably would make it a little bit bigger, but still so you can fold it up and easily put it in your pocket. That's still important. So.
I just wanted to pull up really quickly. Fred, I think this is an excellent next trail to do, especially because we have Johnny Park now, we have the new City Hall, so having that navigable trail between this area and Woody Hollow is great, especially because we also hear people say they have no idea where Woody Hollow is, so if we have signs from here leading to Woody Hollow, I think that's a great benefit to the community. I wanted to remind PTRC that at the last meeting, we showed you trail signs that we were going to order and you approved them and we ordered them. So we do have smaller, oh, I'm going the wrong direction.
And installed them.
And installed them.
Yeah,
So we do have these smaller trail signs that were designed to go on the posts in neutral colors, except for the no, kind of on the no e-bike signs. So if we're trying to be consistent, I would recommend that we stick with these that we voted on last time and have started installing.
But aren't these kind of separate from marking the trail for distances and what Fred's talking about? Isn't this a little bit, I don't know. I mean,
Well,
I get
For the
e-bikes.
rule, for
These
the
are for the
rule
highway.
signs.
Right.
Well, and we were
These
trying
aren't
to be,
specific for the highway.
yeah, we were trying to be consistent across bridled trails and the High Line. So I apologize if I didn't communicate that well at the last
this is
meeting.
all very
I did order-
complicated, and I'm just.
I ordered more for Woody Hollow because that was a suggestion. I
Yeah,
can't remember if that was Rob or you or.
You ordered a size that would fit on one of our existing
Yes.
posts? Oh,
Yes.
good.
Yeah, they're,
Great.
yeah.
But wait,
Good.
back to the point, like these are not replacing this, like trail, I mean, is Welcome to Trails Village at every one of these trail markers?
no. So the one on top is what's existing. The ones on the bottom are, these two that are on the screen right now are what we ordered and are installing in terms of rule signs.
Okay, so that just really is addressing the e-bikes and speed limit though. I guess I'm just seeing other points that you're making.
Well, these are eventually gonna go away,
Right.
all right,
Okay.
these numbers,
So I'm just separating out the signs, that's all I'm saying. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
It's a-
get
But
your
if
point.
we want to go a different direction with the trail signs too, Fred has a good example there of the village trail
Yeah.
signage, so
Yeah.
yeah. So if we're going to deviate from that, that's something the commission should decide sooner rather than later, so we don't get halfway through signing and decide we want some to be
No.
yellow and
No,
some
no.
to be,
No, this sign is great, as it is, because it
Yeah.
marks the village trail.
okay, perfect.
Yeah, then below that, you can have these other informational signs of whatever you want.
Yes, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm sorry, I got confused then that we were talking about making some
No,
of
but I
these
see
yellow
what
or
you're saying,
something.
because there's e-bikes addressed in there, and I get what you're saying. So
Yeah.
there's a bit of a crossover.
yeah.
But the first two, I don't know, okay, are different than what you, right? I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm just trying to make the connection. And there's, okay, never mind.
There's another copy for you. to Jay. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Fred.
But the only one that I would add to as a comment is, Emily, if you can go back to our village trail map, thank you, is your stop at Woody Hollow Park, and I would almost love to have your trail reach to the western edge of the district, of the city, excuse me. So while Woody Hollow Park is a great destination, it would sure be nice if maybe we could take it over to connect in and give the people in the very western part of the village a sense that they have trail connectivity as well. And I realize that in the western side of the city, we have no formalized or very few formalized trails, but we do have the on-street trails. And I would sure like to find a way that we could give trails wider reach into the very western edge of the southwestern part of the city, the northwestern part of the city, and the southeastern part of the city that is Charlevoix and that neighborhood that only has on-street trails, but still give them a formalized trail.
Sure. Sure. No, I agree. I eventually, Rob, thought the Woody Hollow Trail that winds around and eventually dead ends at Bellevue, there could be a sign there right at Bellevue that directs people into Woody Hollow Park and on then into the Highline Canal. I can't tell you how many people I stop on the trail and they look around and I think, what are you looking for? And they say, we want to know how to get to the Highline Canal. And these are people that perhaps just moved into Cherry Hills, so they're not familiar with any of this. So the signs would help that. I mean, we've all lived here, so we know where we're going all the time. But there are a lot of new people.
Well, and I guess where I'm going with this is maybe somehow, even though it's deemed an on-street trail, is I would like to make a loop that leaves Woody Hollow Park, goes west, and then makes use of maybe Lafayette. They go up to Quincy. Sort of an outer belt to some of these inner trails that we're doing. I don't know what I would call it, or the Woody Hollow extension or something, who knows, but it's something that reaches out into these other areas and not have the Woody Hollow Trail stop exclusively at Woody Hollow, so.
All of these trails are dirt bridle trails off the streets.
So you're limiting them to only the bridle trails?
That's what these are.
Okay.
I mean, if you start up Lafayette and these other on-street trails, then are you talking about putting more signposts in that will direct people around? That's another deal, if you get into that. It's easy when you're dealing just with bridle trails. You can put the sign basically anywhere you want that makes sense. So, sure, the southwest part, Viking, South, Lafayette Lane, this whole area, I mean, that's where I live. And people are biking and walking all the time down there, just because there's very little traffic and it's safe. And I don't know about the R4 up here, that's a whole different deal.
I'm talking about the R1 to the south of that, but in particular, but that R4 areas is just as important. What you will hear me talk about, and me individually, is that I believe that our on-street trails are almost as important, if not as important, as are our bridle trails for people moving around.
I agree.
And I would like to see them more formalized as not just, and get a lot of the same protections as our actual trail system that we have in red.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have that right now. That's something that I'm going to personally be pushing for, but we don't have that right now. But if we're trying to designate people in safe sort of sponsored walking trails throughout the village, I personally would like to see all the areas of the village. I think this is a great next step, but as we keep going further and further, we do the obvious not easy ones, but the obvious bridle trails. And then maybe on the 7th iteration of this, you loop in that area that we're talking about now over on Lafayette, or you route the on-street trails that go through the R4 area, Happy Canyon and Nassau Circle in there,
Mm-hmm.
and the R1 area east of Holly Street. But do something that gives those people some ownership of the fact that they're part of the trail system as
Sure.
well.
That can be done. Mhm. Yeah. So Emily, I don't know what the next step is here, but I don't know.
If the commission is happy with this new trail, I think Fred, you can work with Jeff on the number of signs that we'll need, and start going from there.
Do we need to draft a motion or anything like that?
Nope, the committee can just, has given their feedback on it, so that's
Okay.
enough for us to start working on it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the trail system? This is a lot of good work you did, Fred. Thank you for your hard work. And I look forward to working with you on the rest of these trails too. We have a long way ahead. All right, so in backwards order, let us move to unfinished business, which is PTRC projects and priorities for 2022. Take it away, Blake. Thank
Okay,
you.
here, let me pull it up on the screen so that everyone can see it here. Okay. So this is the updated list of projects and priorities for PTRC for 2022. Based on the discussion at the August meeting, I just added a visioning category as the commission requested to the 2022 priorities. The only other change is an increase to the Highline Canal irrigation project amount. We're going to need another water tap for that project, so that expense has been added in to this new document. So both of those changes are highlighted in red. And at this point, I'm just looking for any last feedback from the commission before you make a recommendation to approve the projects and priorities for next year.
The only comment I have is, and I don't know if this is what the spring cleanup is referring to. I don't know if it's us or the city of Inglewood, but we did have that thing scheduled for like throwing out your batteries or whatever, and that got canceled due to COVID or pushed back or whatever, I don't know.
This year, it was just scaled down, but we did still have it. And we had it in City Hall parking lot this year, which typically we have it over at 2101, but to make it a little more accessible, we had it here this year. So we are planning to continue that next year going forward.
Somebody in my neighborhood mentioned to me the other day that they saw a questionnaire regarding the new master plan development. Rob, do you know about a questionnaire that was going around for people's comments?
The P&Z, I believe, with the consultant did an initial questionnaire that was then going to go out. Oh, I don't know if it's gone out. I thought it was going to be refined a little bit more, but if it has gone out, it's got some real broad categories of questions that they are asking for people's input on. So it sounds to me as if it's out on the street.
I don't believe it is. So I think that what you saw was a draft.
Okay.
Probably because we haven't sent it out through, it's obviously, our meetings are public, drafts are public, but it hasn't been sent out and publicized through the website yet because I don't believe it's finalized.
Okay, one of the questions on this draft questionnaire that just hit me kind of sideways and some other people. Apparently, the roundabout at Quincy and Colorado Boulevard is on that questionnaire.
Boy, that was a bad sign.
Yeah.
All in traffic circle.
And
I like
people
you.
said to me, how did that get snuck in, quote unquote, in this questionnaire? And I thought we put this to bed a long time ago, and here it is again. So,
The first meeting that I attended, which was the kickoff meeting since COVID, was in last month, addressed the idea of putting a questionnaire out there with real big broad brushstrokes. I didn't think that it was going to address things that were water under the bridge, I guess I would say. P&Z does have a meeting coming up this coming Tuesday. We can specifically ask them what their thinking is. I don't believe that questionnaire, well, I don't know if that questionnaire was actually a P&Z sponsored versus it was this informal citizens task force putting something out there. But I think the idea is that people are supposed to be asking or being asked about things about land use planning. I don't recall any specific discussion on that last meeting about the roundabout. So I don't know, but it would be disappointing to me individually to see that become a focus of discussion over many of the other land use questions.
Sure.
The only thing that I can think of that maybe it was done was as an introduction or as a attempt to elicit comments because of traffic, because traffic is one of the major concerns that is being asked about as far as the master plan. And so maybe it is a reference to, you know, if we aren't using roundabouts, what is the way to handle traffic? I'm just guessing, but I just would hate to see this important process get derailed by another inflammatory discussion about whether or not people were transparent, untransparent, of any of the other crud that went into that discussion historically.
Yeah, no, I actually, it put a smile on my face when I heard it. I thought, oh my gosh, this thing still has a little life in it somewhere.
I think it's a good idea, just call it a traffic circle, but I'm right at that corner.
You're right there,
Tori,
Tori.
get out of there at all unless I cut somebody off today. So I don't think it's the worst idea. I didn't like how the process went down, but there's a little light in there, and I wouldn't hate to see it get revived in the future.
But I was telling you
this
with
related to
respect,
this though.
yeah, with respect to the priorities. Go ahead.
Yeah, if this isn't just related to this, let's try to get through, if we like these priorities, and we can get to that discussion in the comments. Is that fair?
Yeah, please.
I mean, it seems to me as if it reflects what we talked about last month. It does put in the category for visioning with just some loose language of goals to be determined with no money, but it does act as a placeholder, and that was really the only major difference that I think I see. It has the money repeating from the Highline Canal, but I don't think we have any other different discussion about specific new priorities that are not on this priority list.
And I did have a question on the additional 2022 parks projects. Those are separate projects, correct? It's not an edit, it's an actual addition.
So that category, the top category is sort of PTRC's priorities that you'll be focusing on.
Right?
The bottom category is park projects that we're working on sort of as a staff level that won't need as much input from PTRC.
Okay, so we just have to ask the city council for the extra 55,000.
So we're not, where we are in the budgeting process, staff creates the initial budget request at a staff level. We have individual meetings with our representative council members. So Councilor Randy Wheel is our parks liaison, basically, council member. So we have met with, Jay and I met with him this week to go through what's in the budget right now. This all gets presented to council for the first time on October 5th at a study session. So we're not going to council and saying, we need an extra this amount. We're building the budget right now. So it's not really a request, a standalone request at this point. It's just going into the budget document that we're working on.
Thank you for clarifying.
Speaking of Randy Wild, was that comment based on, related to the cell towers?
What comment? I'm sorry.
You just mentioned Randy.
He's the liaison to Parks and Recs from council.
Yeah.
Okay. I spent 45 minutes on the phone with Randy about a week ago. because of my interest in cell towers here in
Mhm.
Cherry Hills. I don't know about you guys, but we get unbelievably bad cell connections at my house. I have to go out in the middle of the street, go out in the backyard, and it's bothering a lot of people, and I'd love to find out, why can't we get more cell towers here in Cherry Hills? Randy knows a lot about this. So he sort of gave me a cell tower 101 that night on the phone. But he said, you really need to take this up with Chris Kramer. So I haven't talked to Chris yet, but I know we've talked about it. It's in here. Because it might be located in our parks.
Yes, if we get a request to put one in the park.
Yeah.
All right, let's try this down task here. I move to approve the 2022 priorities for Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission.
Second?
Thank you, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Here is our priorities for 2022. I love the vision, it's so open, whatever we want it to be. All right. Let's move along to the reports. Let's just start at the end, actually, we can go last. Chelsea, anything?
No.
Fred?
I'm done.
Thank you, you have reported pretty consistently. Aaron?
Nothing for me.
Mr. Eber?
Couple things quick. As I mentioned, P and Z will meet next, I believe it's Tuesday night. They are the formal entity that is responsible for the master plan. The Citizens Task Force that I mentioned last meeting is sort of the precursor to that, that's working from the citizen standpoint. There will be an open house, I believe it's September 29th.
Yes,
I don't know what time.
5 to 7 p.m. in John Mead Park for the master plan.
Can you repeat that, September
Sure.
29th?
So it's September 29th, which I think is a Wednesday, from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Our hope is that we can have it outside in the park unless it starts pouring rain on us, in which case we'll move it into this room.
And just really briefly, what is the open house going to cover?
In large part, it is to solicit public comment on what people want to see in the master plan. Could be anything from open space to
Cell phone coverage.
cell phone coverage to building codes, recreational issues. It's literally anything, if you go back through your master plan from before, it is to solicit comments that the citizens may have about what they want to see in the new update of the master plan. Not just what's in there, but what should have been in there, or what's in there that shouldn't be. So,
So now's a good opportunity to have your voice be heard in this drafting, because I've been here many years now and I never felt like the opportunity has been in front of me so openly and available to actually make a big difference in the infrastructure of the city. So now's the time to say what you want to say with the most power, so.
the other reason I mentioned the P and Z meeting on Tuesday is a number of months ago, the issue came before us with respect to the Theory O'Leary Trust and the area of the city called Kansas, and we looked at the question of some potential trail easements that are in that area. And as you may remember, it went from us to P and Z, and then it would go to City Council. We did our review of it. P and Z, for whatever reason, did not have it on its agenda or had meetings canceled, but it is on their agenda for this coming Tuesday.
Tuesday the 14th.
I will,
Yes.
Tuesday the 14th.
What time is that at?
P and Z meetings are,
5 p.m. now, I believe. They just moved it. I'll verify, Rob, if you want to keep going.
you know, we did our gig already. I was thinking I may attend to observe. Obviously, we are allowed to, I believe, make public comment at their meeting the same way anybody's allowed to make comment at ours.
As an individual,
As
not
an
as a
individual.
commissioner, yes.
That is correct. However, you know, I want people to know about it so that we can keep apprised of what it is that we did, and I wanted to make sure we all know about it. I'll leave it to everybody to do what they choose to do about it, to make their own decisions, but I just want to make sure people know that it's next Tuesday. I mentioned the open house on the 29th. The other thing that I wanted to mention real quick was I believe it was last city council meeting, and I mentioned earlier a little bit, there was a substantial discussion about Quincy Farms, and one of the council people, without going back in all the history of Quincy Farms, is, as you know, the council requested RFPs about potentially having people come in and either manage or own, or a combination thereof, of Quincy Farms. And it had two submittals, two proposals came in. They are setting up, or have set up, meetings with the two different submitters, submissions. And for a lot of reasons, there's been some question about that process from what I can tell. And one of the council members sought to amend their previous RFP proposal to basically have the council adopt that the city of Cherry Hills Village would only review proposals that would not involve the transfer of title away from Cherry Hills Village.
Correct.
That discussion was lengthy, animated, I won't say contentious, but animated. And at the end of that discussion, the motion carried, which changes the language that only proposals, so it reads in essence now, that only proposals will be considered that remain having title with the village and the people of Cherry Hills. Obviously, it's a major change and a major issue. Council is going to have, I think, public meetings coming up on this, but Quincy Farms is 26% of our open space, to the extent that you consider it open space like all the other parks and things like that. I'm not taking a side, I'm trying to report on the issue, and that is that there are huge discussions of a very controversial issue. And I've always advocated that Ptrc needs to have a very strong voice in Quincy Farm. And I continue to make that same comment and urge all of us to reach out to all of our contacts to talk about what it is that people really want to see with Quincy Farm. Because part of me says it looks like we're kind of going back to the beginning of the drawing board. Part of me seems to say that there still is a group that wants to continue using the old blueprint, even if it needs substantial tweaking. But where it also comes into play is what I mentioned earlier, and that is, there is no question that Quincy Farm in any iteration will require a substantial amount of funding. Between O&M, between capital things, Jeff, you probably have a 5-page list of things that need to be done at Quincy Farm, and maybe that's an understatement of only 5 pages, but when you talk about the money that goes to, the mayor talked an awful lot, and the mayor's public comment was that while a non-voting member of council or a vote only in the event of a tie, his public comment was that he believes, from what I can tell, that the expenditures associated with keeping Quincy Farms, given the other budget issues that the village will face in the future, it places it under a position where it needs to be done in concert with somebody else, and that could include, or should include, divesting title from the village. The vote there was one city council member who was not present due to a death in his family. But it was 4-1 in favor of the motion to amend the discussion to only allow proposals that would still remain in the city title. So we gotta be involved, we individually gotta be involved, and I urge all of us to start reaching out to everybody, because this could be as or more contentious than even the roundabout was.
Well, and there's a meeting on the 21st, right here, for anybody interested in Quincy Farm. Anybody in the village, open to the public. Anybody can come here, stand up, and tell us what you think. I know for a fact there are people working on this right now that believe, as I do, there is absolutely no way Cherry Hills should let this property go. Now, how it's structured, that's fine, but this is absolutely, if you go around the country to beautiful little communities that have had an historic property that they've saved and maintained and involved with their schools and involved with all different kinds of organizations, this is our chance to do something very, very special, and we're not going to let it go.
So I follow up that comment with the idea that, again, it wraps into the master plan, get involved with the master plan. It involves Quincy Farm in and of itself. It involves for us individually at Ptrc the question of funding for all the different projects. We heard tonight about the Highland Canal, Quincy Farm in general. I would like to request of Emily that we get sort of our budget 101 all over again at a future meeting, so that we can understand, because the mayor made comment that there were a lot of priorities in the open space and only so much money. And in order for us to understand it better, we need to understand, or at least I individually need to understand the budget better. And so I would like to have an understanding of how much money we got, what's our future use of money stream, what are we committed to, because if we don't know the understanding of whether or not we have money to take care of Quincy Farms, and we're PTRC, the average person in the community certainly can't understand it. And so that's my request. I don't have any authority to make it so, but I would hope that we can understand our budget so that we can make intelligent discussion about priorities from a citizen standpoint to council, that we think this. One of the discussion items, for instance, that came up when the mayor was talking about priorities is the question of utility undergrounding, which the village has been talking about for a long time. It's expensive. Would you rather have money from the city going to utility undergrounding or keeping Quincy Farm? Would you rather have money going to Quincy Farm or working on distinct pieces on the Highland Canal? Can we not do them all? I don't know, because I don't know the budget stream. I don't know what the budget what we really have for projections 5 years out, 10 years out, that made me an uneducated decision maker.
Okay, wait, just two points here, so just even having a brief conversation about this, I can understand this. One, this was Ken Anderson's dying wish, right, to give gifts to the city. How did that get undone? I don't understand that part. And secondly, if we were to lose this as a village, what happens to it? Does it just get sold and it just becomes somebody else's record?
No.
Okay, see, I'm sorry, I just want to understand these points, so I can't even speak to it.
The quick version that, if you give me and these are only my perspectives because I'm one guy, is that yes, Cat Anderson's will.
Can I jump in with some facts?
Sure.
Please, before you give your opinion. Okay. Because parts of council's discussion were missed in your summary, and I really want to make sure that we're all on the same page so that we all know what we're talking about and we're coming from the same place. So, Chelsea, to answer your questions first. Kat left the city Quincy Farm through a life estate, so that allowed her to live on the property until she passed away. So all of the paperwork for us, for the city to acquire ownership of Quincy Farm was done back in 2007, when she also put a conservation easement on the property, which can't be changed, can't be broken, can't be taken off. She passed away in 2016 in June, and the title for the property turned over to the city. So what council's discussion was, the original request for proposal said your proposal could have us consider transferring the property to you. It could have us consider you just managing the property. They really wanted, in their original intent, to be very flexible and see what proposals were out there and see what the options were. At their August 31st meeting, they voted to amend the RFP so that they would no longer consider any proposals that involve transferring the property away. So that is off the table at this point from a council standpoint. One of the important things in their motion was that they didn't just change the RFP and say, okay, this one proposal from the Anderson family is thereby void, is invalid. They did give anyone that had submitted the opportunity to resubmit their proposal with transfer of title taken out of it by September 14th. So at this point, we're before that date. So there could be two proposals that are presented on the 21st, in addition to the staff presentation that we're going to be giving with different options for the farm. Higher cost, lower cost, mid, for the buildings, for site improvements, for maintenance going forward, and really any combination of those things are options that council could consider. We're not really showing them proposals from staff, we're giving them ranges of options. So just to make that part clear, there could be two presentations on the 21st from other groups, there could just be one, but right now we don't know because
Well, my understanding is they
owner
even
has-
opened it up to, they wanted to say, look, well, we had two submittals originally.
No, that is not the case.
It did not reopen it to
No,
anybody?
it did not
everybody?
reopen the RFP.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, in closing, it's a contentious issue. It's a huge piece of property with a lot of money. It's a lot of open space, it's a lot of opportunity, it's a lot of obligation. And we just, as the open space citizen group, in essence for the city, we gotta be incredibly well versed so that we can play translator for the average citizen. And it's gonna be hot and heavy in the next number of weeks, if not months. So I urge all of us to get involved. I'll close my report with something very happy, and that was that we mentioned a little bit earlier, that it is my understanding that we recently received Project of the Year for Allen Hutto and Mini Park. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this,
So I didn't mean to take your thunder, if that was going to be one of your report items.
and this building.
So this building was a different award. This building and John Mead together as a Civic Center campus won the American Society of Landscape Architects Presidential Award of Excellence, which is for the state, which is their highest honor. So we got a Public Works Association award, that's their highest honor for the park, and we got one for the park and the Civic Center campus.
And when will that actually be presented to the village?
The APWA award for John Mead will be presented to us at the state chapter award luncheon, which is October 26th. And then after that, representatives from APWA will come to a council meeting. So we're hoping November 2nd, that's the next council meeting after the awards luncheon. But I will keep you all posted because we'll have a little celebration at council that night.
So they'll have a plaque that will be hung in the lobby and that kind of thing?
We tend to collect them in Jay Goldie's office, but we might be able to hang in the lobby.
Oh, we gotta get them out of Jay's office, come on.
Well, I would just like to make it a tip of the hat to PTRC for all of our involvement. Everybody worked really hard on PTRC to have a lot of the input. As we know, we did a master plan. And it resulted in a great project for the city. We wouldn't be done, however, if we stopped at only thanking ourselves. I'd like to thank, the city staff. You guys implemented, contracted for, and oversaw the construction of a great, great project. Emily, Jeff, Pamela, you're our faces that we see every month. Thank you, 1,000 thank yous for everything you guys do. And thank you for your work on this project. You guys are just aces in terms of how this all went down. And it resulted in other people recognizing all of your hard work, not just us on PTRC. So thank you, thank you, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. And, yes, I would like to also emphasize, because I have been in touch with, Mr. Cook, I believe is the city planner, and this master plan is possibly like a once in a residency chance to make a difference and have your voice heard. I have a few directions I'm going in as a private resident that I really, really care about, particularly wilderness that I keep bringing up, wild spaces. If you look at the map, Quincy Gulch is the part that concerns flooding, so just to like go all full circle to the beginning. And we've left Quincy Gulch, my neighbors and I, quite wild, and there is a decidedly huge increase in wildlife because of it. It's behind fences, nobody can see it anyways, and wildlife love it. So I'm a huge advocate for wildlife, and I'm gonna make sure my voice is heard on the master plan at that meeting, if it all goes according to plan. And that's all I have for reports. Thank you.
I'm gonna jump around because you guys covered a lot of mine, so thank you. The first report that I have is it's a shame the Highline Canal Conservancy isn't here. The Highline Canal Working Group also won an award for the underpass. Hold on, I don't have the right page. So the Highline Canal Working Group won the Arapahoe County Board of Commissioners in Open Spaces Our Progress Takes Flight Award in recognition of stewardship and conservation and protection of the outdoors and improving quality of life for Arapahoe County residents. So they won for the underpass the underpass is in Hamden, Colorado, and the ones that are going in at Parker in Mississippi. So we will be accepting the award at their breakfast later next week. So Cherry Hills Village, Denver, and Arapahoe County are the representatives from the working group who are accepting those awards. So congratulations to the Conservancy as well. I'll stick with the Highline. The MOU that we talked about a little bit before for the Highline Canal Conservancy and the Highline Canal Collaborative is going to council on November 2nd. So as we talked about earlier, it's not committing us to more money or more resources going to them in terms of staff time. It's really solidifying the structure of the Canal Collaborative. So all of the 11 jurisdictions, the Conservancy, Denver Water, and Mile High Flood District in how we work together. So it's really the next step in creating that framework and intergovernmental cooperation as we move forward into the next steps of stormwater and shared maintenance. So that will be going before council on November 2nd. Just a last bit about Quincy Farm process. That September 21st meeting, the order will be staff is going to present about Quincy Farm, and then we'll have either one or two proposers present, and then it will be, that's all in the study session, which is going to go long, we know that. And then council is going to open it up for public comment. So that meeting is going to be very heavily advertised on the website, through email blasts, through social media, and you'll see yard signs go up about that meeting as well. So we are doing everything we can per council's request to try and get that message out there that council will be talking about Quincy Farm that night. They're not making any decisions about Quincy Farm that night. So the meeting will also be live streamed. If you want to watch online, there is not a virtual component to it to participate, but you can watch it live at home. It's also going to be recorded and on the city website. So if you miss it, if you're not free at that time, you can watch it later. So we'll be doing everything we can to advertise that, but really for council, it's a listening session. It's not where a decision is going to be made about the farm.
Do you think it'd be really helpful, at least to me personally, if you could possibly give us a little September calendar for these things coming up?
Yeah, I can send an email with the 21st meeting and the 29th meeting.
And the planning and zoning, but you said that's not a particularly relevant meeting next week.
No, that was actually one of my reports too. So if you want to continue to follow the Cantato vacation application, that's next Tuesday.
Okay.
But Rob covered that one for me, so thank you, Rob. Okay, September 14th, 21st, and 29th. And the last item I have is that the Art Commission is going to come before you at your October meeting, so on October 14th, to talk about possibly relocating the Crew series, which is a series of sculptures by Emmett Culligan, into John Meade Park. So they are in the city already. They're at the corner of Quincy and Holly in the Denver Water property that we maintain. So they will be requesting to move them into the park, which would be great. We'd have some art in the park. I think they're still determining the location with the artist, but they'll be coming before you to make that request. So if you'd like to go check them out ahead of time, they're at Quincy and Holly. But you'll get more information.
Is that a permanent thing for the city, or is it like the other ones that circle every
I
years?
believe we own those.
So I'm curiously, why do they not want them on that corner anymore?
Just because they don't get a lot of traffic there, like foot traffic. So that way more people could see them is really the reasoning.
Yeah, it'll actually be the third time they've been moved.
Yeah, well,
They were at Holly and Delania.
they've gone from a median to a pocket park to the main park.
They're not too bad, actually.
Not too bad.
It won't
Yeah,
take
they're
long.
not huge.
I
They're
actually-
small.
I actually met with Kendall out there and we looked at locations and the artist
Do you
looked
want-
at those locations.
I have a photo. Hang on. This is one of, this makes it look huge. They're not huge, they're like this big.
All
What is
Yeah,
that?
they're pretty
What
understated.
is that?
Yeah.
That's art.
That's art.
It's whatever you think it is.
Very subjective.
Yeah.
It sure is.
Yes, it is.
So we'll have, I'm not sure who from the Art Commission will come, but one of their commissioners will come talk to you about that possibility. And that's all I have. Jeff, do you have anything?
I do not have anything tonight.
Okay.
All right, then, is there a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Megan, I second.
All in favor? This
Aye.
meeting is adjourned at 8:03.
Good night, Sheldon.
Good night.
Good night.
Good job, Tori.
The best of luck to the team.